Welcome, everybody, to the Crown Lane podcast, Crown Lane on the Record, episode number 1. In this podcast, we talk about all things to do with studio, all things recording, listening, and sound. I'm Lawrence Bradshaw, and this is...
John Merriman.
John Merriman. First of all, blimey, it's been a while in the making for us to do our own. I often reflect on the fact that we have so many people who use Crown Lane Studio to record their own podcast. I'm very glad that we're finally doing our one. So, first of all, John, how does it feel for you that we're doing this right now? And second of all, if people are unaware of the studio, who you might be, who I might be, we'll let them know in our opening podcast. So take it away.
Great. How do I feel? I feel really glad. I think for us, knocking down the walls of the studio is the main thing so that people can physically be a part of what goes on here and not feel like, oh, there's an exclusive thing going on behind the door here and that this is a world that nobody can enter. And particularly for young people who would never feel that a studio is somewhere that they can enter, this podcast is the beginning of their journey. And for those that are older and have been in the industry a long time, this is a chance to explore perhaps areas of the industry that they wouldn't normally. So I think this is for everyone. I am pleased that our walls are coming down and that the studio and the music industry, the sound industry, the spoken word industry is one that is becoming more democratic and that there are more ways in, so more pathways in. And your second question was, who am I?
Who are you, John?
I am the founder of Crown Lane Studio, and that was a good many years ago, and when it was just one room, and we would have been sitting currently in amongst boxes and cups and things of the previous owner, Caroline's coffee shop that was here before Metronome was, which is the event space that we opened during the pandemic. And this very room here was one that we adapted and changed into a bit of a podcasting room and a creative suite where people can come and make music, have meetings, they can do podcasts or rehearsals. This morning we had an opera singer in here rehearsing for a forthcoming recording. And it's one of those rooms that just everyone seems to love being in.
It's my favourite room in the whole studio. And if you're just listening to this, it's not filled with boxes for coffee stuff anymore. There's a beautiful piano in here.
Yeah, and we put a massive window and we knocked a wall out and we raised the floor. So this room is actually higher. So if you're a wheelchair user or you are playing music where you're sitting on the floor to play, so a lot of Bangladesh origin music or Indian music, musicians are sat on the floor and they're making the same eye line as those that are in the control room, which is just such a lovely different nuance because you're like on a stage, you're performing, and rather than it being sort of like you're in a playpen that you can't quite see. So this room's really opened up the studio. But yeah, so the studio started 17 years ago and this room is the newest of the rooms, used by all sorts of people. So it was resident by the drummer Dave Rowntree from Blur, who was in here for the last 3 months, and he just loved it as a creative writing space for an upcoming film that he's involved with. And then other people use it for all sorts of things. Opera, piano. There's a lot of piano work that goes on here. And we've got a unique piano, which is just behind me, and it's an upright piano, but it's also a MIDI controlled piano. So it's quite a funky little tool there. So yeah, a very brief intro to the studio, sort of physically. The things that we are specialising in are recording. That's number one. We cannot forget recording. That is our main thing. Music and spoken word are our two key things that we specialise in a lot. And this podcast is particularly about spoken word today.
It is. We shall come on to that momentarily. But yeah, absolutely.
And then the other areas are, we've got a beautiful programme called Crown Lane Live, which allows young people to get behind the scenes of a headline artist performing. So those artists are, some are up and coming, some are already up, and they will perform, and they perform across the different rooms. It's all filmed and broadcast to a live audience next door and then put out on YouTube. So there are sort of big things that we're working on at the moment.
And my name's Lawrence Bradshaw and I am the studio manager at Crown Lane Studio. And the reason, well, one of the many reasons that we're going ahead with this podcast is because, John, you might blush when I say this, but you have just such an incredible amount of knowledge when it comes to recording and sound that throughout this series, I'm going to act as the question asker, question master. and sort of pick your brains about all the incredible techniques that you know that's up in your head that we need to get out, because we want to share practices. And really interesting what you said about sort of opening the doors to the studio as well, because typically the studio world can have a little bit of a them and us kind of situation. And through a lot of the outreach that we do with schools and young people, we've seen how meaningful it can be to get young people in through the door and show them around. I know that when I was younger, I would have loved to have just come to a studio like this. But when I was younger, most studios had a bloke outside smoking a cigarette. What are you doing here, kind of thing. So it's really nice to sort of, again, open the lid, open the windows, open the doors, and show people around, talk about what we're doing.
I think we're very unique here in that the studio is one that we started based on the principle that I would never pay to go to a studio myself, a traditional studio. And so what we had to create here was something that was different to what you get elsewhere. And I think that's more true than ever, that we need to be agile in the music industry to think, don't just replicate, don't just create what you've seen elsewhere, but think, what is the niche where I live? What is the niche where in the genre that I work in? And where are the gaps in that? And that's not just a one-time thing. If I was still doing what I did 18 years ago, studio would have gone bust a very long time ago. But every year, and now sometimes monthly, we're revisiting vision, revisiting the concepts and the routes that we're taking and thinking, is this still relevant to today's industry? And often the jobs coming in will be the thing that tells us that. If they're not coming in, we're doing something wrong. It's not anyone else's fault. It's up to us to make sure that we're putting ourselves in positions where we are the solution to people's problems. And until we find that place and put ourselves as that solution, we're probably in the wrong place. So it's a constant evolution. I think for anyone learning, just to think that you can go in, mix a band, then there's a job for mixing a band. That isn't necessarily, it's one of the tools, but it's in part of the toolkit, but it's not the be all and end all to having a career in this line of work.
No, absolutely. Right, there was a bit of a longer preamble than would normally be, but we just wanted to establish for our episode 1. Now, each episode throughout this series will have a different theme, a different topic, and a different talking point. Today, it seemed very, very poignant to begin on all things spoken word. So it seemed very, again, poignant to do that while we're actually speaking words into these podcast mics. So we're thinking about all things to do with podcasting, audiobooks, voiceover, radio drama, which is something that Crown Lane Studio, and specifically you, John, have a lot of history with. So the first thing that we want to speak about, that I wanted to ask you about, is can you tell us about the different recording setups for each art form when it comes to spoken word, and how you've done it before at Crown Lane Studio for people doing podcasting or people doing voiceover work, which we do quite a lot of, and the different sort of microphones that might be used, things to bear in mind.
Absolutely. There's some really fundamental things that need to be established before you begin in terms of the technical side, and then we'll look at the artist side as well in terms of, as an artist, how different those different things are. And I think for a lot of people going into sound and at any stage, at any age, the picture is behind a sound desk recording music, and that is definitely a great skill. Music technology is still a course. I really wish they could change the title of all the music tech courses to sound technology, because although there is a lot of work in music in different places, sound is really what we're dealing with as opposed to just music. And if we limit ourselves just to music, we are cutting out a huge revenue stream for young people who are going into the industry who think that music will only be providing their work, when actually spoken word, for us here, certainly is a really big part of what comes in. And it wasn't necessarily something I was trained in initially, so it took me a long time to make sure I was retrained and ready for that back 15 years ago, to make sure that what we're doing is delivering what is needed by the industry, which keeps changing. So it's definitely worth establishing the fact that there is a need to understand the skills, even if you only want to do beats, rap, making music. If you want to earn from this, chances are you may need to, at some point, record the spoken word as well. So it's worth establishing that first. There's some really key differences between all the different types of microphones in the different rooms. This room here, you can tell, for those of you that are just listening, you can hear a little bit of the room back. Not an awful lot, but you'll hear a tiny bit of the room back in the background. It's not completely dead, but it's also not echoey. So this room is perfect if you're trying to get a nice natural voice for conversation, for audiobooks. We'd often bring in slightly more acoustic treatment if we want it completely dry. And the reasons for needing it completely dry is if you're going to be doing different acoustics afterwards, affecting the dry sound. An example of that would be an audiobook that is set sometimes with scenes inside and sometimes outside. It's very quick. It's a very quick giveaway when you can hear the reverb of a room and then they've put seagulls or traffic noise. It just doesn't work.
I'll get Chris to put some of them in for this, I think.
Oh, will you?
Yeah, definitely.
There they are. Great. Thanks, Chris. But the main difference is sometimes you do want the acoustic of a room. If you're recording an audio book and you're just sitting down and reading it page after page after page after page, that's very different to a radio drama, which is taking you on a journey physically to different spaces, unless it is just a monologue, for example. But the context of an audiobook is less important. That you need it dry, but it doesn't need to be clinically dry. So some people are sort of sometimes go too far on the acoustics, but it's often drier than you think. So in a house, a living room which has lots of soft furnishings is often good, but is sometimes, with windows, for example, sound can't tell whether something's up or down. So with one wall as windows and the ceiling as flat, that's exactly the same as inverting the room and having a solid wood floor and another wood or solid
that's
flat,
a really good
flat
way
wall
of thinking about it, yeah.
somewhere else. So it's often not quite as absorbent as you think, because we picture things as if they're the right way up. But in a room, you do need to think about all the different acoustics. So in here, we've got acoustic tiles above us. We've got acoustic floor underneath us. And by that, I mean it's got rubber underneath wood bit with the underlay, so that the sound doesn't reflect off the floor. Absorbent panels around the room, and then a couple of panels of wood diffusers in the corner, and they're in every room, the diffusion. And sound acoustics always needs those three things. The reflections, you need some element, or else you're in an anechoic chamber, and you don't want that. It's horrible. In an anechoic chamber, you can hear the blood inside your ears. It's so dry. So you do need some element of reflection, but not too much. You need some amount of absorption, but not just sitting underneath a duvet, where everything is absorbed.
That most people did through COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and
it was the number one thing, wasn't it? Cover yourself in a duvet.
Absolutely. And shove yourself in a wardrobe. Yeah. And so many people did that. And it worked in that it's a very dry sound, but quite uncomfortable and quite sterile after a while to listen to. So,
depending on the bedding, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Other varieties are available. There's a certain amount, though, of diffusion, and diffusion is the thing that gives a room its character in terms of, in here, our diffusion panels are made of wood, and they are different depths, and sort of about a hand span of it is different materials, thicknesses of wood, and sometimes spaces, but very random. And that diffusion, sometimes it's on ceilings. So in room 2, we've got diffusion on the ceilings. In the control room in here, they're on the wall panels. But that just changes the quality of the sound. So if you're recording an audiobook or something like that, you need the nice mixture of the mainly absorbing, not too much reflection, maybe a little bit, and then you get a nice charming sound for that kind of thing. If you are singing, you may even want the sound of the room or some of the reverb of the room to support the singer's performance. If you're trying to sing in a very dead space, it's really, really difficult. There's no support for the voice. Compare that to singing in a cathedral, where even the weakest singer, when they're you. So that on a much smaller scale, a room that can support the voice, like room 1, where there's just enough, really lovely balance between the three, and it was designed for that, for voice. And the same with this room. It's a really pleasurable experience to sing in that room. So like the opera singer this morning really likes this room in particular because it's dry enough, but there's still some support for the voice. So let's go to one particular podcast which comes out of radio drama, which comes out on is it the 9th of May?
I believe so.
It's we'll put the details underneath here, but that's one that was recorded here just recently with a voice artist and singer, Will Young. So Will Young spoken word was the fundamental purpose of the radio drama, to narrate a monologue.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, we used a condenser mic. So not a podcast mic. We'll come on to these in just a minute. We use a condenser mic to capture all the nuance of the story in a really beautiful, open, sort of... I always like to think of a condenser mic as being able to tell the whole story. They don't have necessarily a particular character compared to dynamic mics, which have this thing called the proximity effect. I'll demonstrate it now. When you're very close, you get a very, very intimate sound, and you move back and you've got much more open sound. A condenser microphone is, depending on what one you buy, they are designed for different purposes, like spoken word, singing, choirs, different instruments. And that microphone is just very honest. It's like the ear. It can hear every last detail in the room, and they do have different characters, very, very much so, different ones. But they are. It doesn't matter as much how close or far you are from it. You don't have that issue of proximity effect. They're just picking up all the time. They would be a nightmare on a stage, as a stadium or a gig or a festival or anything like that. If you had a condenser mic and it was at the front for the singer, it would equally be picking up all the band behind and everything. But in a studio where all of that is almost taken away and absorbed.
All the dead space, and then you create from the centre of that.
Exactly, and then you get every quality of the voice.
And can I ask which microphone in particular you were using, just in case people want to have a little research?
So for that one, we were using a transformerless Neumann mic because they are hassle-free.
They've
got the nicest capsule, and in a high-pressure context like this was a BBC radio drama, we don't want to be messing about with microphones that have loads of charm and valve mics that have loads of hiss and a really high noise floor. We just want something that's clean, a gorgeous capsule that's going to be able to capture the voice artists at their best when they are talking. So we made sure that we use the Neumann for all the spoken word, and then that goes through compressors, not too much, just a light bit of compression, so then in post-production they can do whatever they need, and then that goes into we use Pro Tools, but for spoken word, whatever you're most comfortable in, leaving always enough headroom for those moments that are extremely loud. However, for the song, that's not what we're looking for. We were looking for charm.
Because in this production, there was the majority of it was a monologue, but there was obviously you get Will Young to do your radio drama. You have to have a song in there, and there was a really amazing moment where we were all in the control room, and then Will started singing, and it was absolutely beautiful, wasn't it? Yeah. So, what was the process then?
So we switched then to a valve mic. We used the Sontronics Aria mic, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous, silky smooth mic. The noise floor is higher. You've got a lot of charm and things coming into the microphone that give it a particular character. The song was quite somber, and so we wanted to get that across as well. We didn't need it just open and honest like a reproduction of him talking. It needed to have all the charm and the detail of the song. So we went for a valve mic, which has then a power supply as well. And again, we then put that through not just the compressor, but we put that through what we refer to as our golden channel. Now, everybody can have a golden channel. It can be software based, it can be hardware based. But this is where you have your favorite microphone in your best room, in your best space, in your best room, going through your favorite cable. That's kind of irrelevant, but for some people it's very important. And that goes into your favorite channel on the desk, which is then patched to whatever outboard gear you're using, or straight into if you're using an audio interface, straight into whatever your line is that you know, the best preamp, the best EQ, the best, if you're warming it up, are you using an EQ that's outboard, as we do, or using a software EQ that you know just enhances, like a Pool Tech, where you're going to be warming up the bass just enough using one plug-in and then just giving a little boost to the top end as well? Or are you going to be doing some sort of harsh filtering and cutting of some of the frequencies and doing some more surgical work, in which case you want a more graphical representation where you can actually panoramically take out certain frequencies that are causing problems? And sometimes you need a mixture of both. But your golden channel is going from the best room, the best mic, through the best cable, through your favourite channel, sometimes 2, sometimes channel 4. and then into your interface, and then with your favorite preamps, if you're using simulations of them, EQs, compressors, and everything. That means that that everything that you are in control of and is well known. It doesn't matter how many plugins you buy. I generally go to the same two. I use the same EQ, the same compressor nearly every time.
Yeah.
A Pultec simulation for EQ, and then a compressor, one of the 1176 emulations. So we've got the outboard actual 1176s, but we also have the software ones, often using those. And if you've got universal audio gear, the amazing thing is they've got some of that built in as well. So it's definitely worth looking at those two, the 1176 simulations and the Pultec. Spoken word is just absolutely gorgeous, and you get a really rich, lovely sound. So that's for spoken word. I said I'd come on to podcasts. They're very different in that they use a dynamic mic. So that's more like a stage mic, or the famous SM58.
Yeah, everyone's favourite.
Absolutely. They sold over 1 million, and that was about 10 years ago. They're the world's biggest selling microphone ever. In fact, if you ask anyone to draw a microphone, they'll...
Yeah, straight to the SM58.
And these are a very similar capsule inside.
So what are we using today, John?
So these are Sontronics. Other brands are available. And you can tell the difference between a podcast mic and a standard mic in that everything is built in. They're ugly, they're big. You can recognize them as being a podcast mic, but they're built in this way for a very, very valid reason. Inside here is quite a lot of foam. So where you can get away within the studio having a big pop shield, and you can have the distance and the stand all built. When you're podcasting, you need to have things in different places, because you might need to be reading a script. Some people have them coming from above, or you might want to be able to chat into a guest, so you'll have it underneath. And with those differences, you haven't got so much space for a massive pop filter. So pop filters got smaller to the point at which they built them in. And in here is quite a lot. It's the same capsule that they use in this mic as their handheld equivalent of the SM58, the Solo. I don't know if they would like to call it the equivalent, but it fulfills the same function. Now, with that pop filter built in and the capsule positioned the right distance, it means that if you get quite close, it doesn't matter so much, because there's still that distance. Whereas with a handheld one, you sometimes be a little bit too close or far, because a singer wants that. When they're singing, they want to have intimate moments, and they want to have moments where they are belting a note and they're pulling it far away. But so the functionality is based, or rather the aesthetics, the build of it is based on the function of recording spoken word through a dynamic mic, which means that when I'm interviewing you, or you are interviewing me, or you're interviewing someone else, the two mics remain isolated. Whereas if we were using condenser mics, your mic over there, by you, would be picking up an awful lot of what I was saying.
The rest of the band syndrome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But this is giving isolation and clarity at the same time.
And these are Podcast Pros.
These are called the Sontronics Podcast Pro. Yeah, they're made in the UK, and they're available in pretty much every colour, which is a really lovely little thing, because it can match a company's brand.
Other brands available. Well, on that note, I think we're going to take a very short break, and then afterwards we're going to come back and we're going to be talking about different jobs within the industry.
Passionate about podcasts and sound? Dive into the Sculpt Mixing course. Developed over 2 years, this online course delivers top-tier mixing tips straight from our bustling commercial studio. With guided videos, downloadable audio content, and a comprehensive handbook, you'll elevate your skills at your own pace. Visit crownlanestudio.co.uk/education and enter Podcast Special at checkout for an exclusive 30% discount. At Crown Lane, we help you sound better. Download now and let's get back to the episode.
Welcome back to the second and final part of this first episode of ours, thinking about all things spoken word on Crown Lane on the record. John, I would like to ask you to for your thoughts about the different jobs that are available in the world of sound and audio when we come to think about spoken word, because something you said right at the beginning was about how people perceive the industry. And especially with studios as well, because when I was younger, you think of a studio and you think rock band, you think the Stones or the Beatles, and that's it. But actually, there's this humongous world behind it that isn't exactly forefront of fame, which really doesn't account for much of what studios use. So when people are thinking about work that they might like to do in the world of spoken word, can you elaborate slightly
Absolutely. I think with spoken word, the two sides of it being the artist side and then the technician side, the jobs that exist in the artist world are totally different from the jobs that work in the technical side, though some artists, and the majority nowadays, want to have at least a very basic setup that they can use for themselves. And so I'll talk about that just first, so that from an artist point of view, it's worth having the best microphone that you can for the money, but not necessarily thinking, I have to have the greatest Neumann microphone and spend 3,000-4,000, just to have the best one that you can afford, to mean that you can do the jobs at the level that you think you are aiming for. By that, I mean, I work with a voiceover artist who does an awful lot of high-end client work. And so she does a lot of adverts, spoken word adverts for television, film, all sorts. And she does all of that from home. Though about a year ago, she was doing a job for TikTok and her background noise just wasn't low enough. So the noise floor was too high in her house for them to pass the work that she was sending. And every time they'd say, look, there's traffic noise and we know there's AI and things that get rid of it, we're looking for a completely clear sound to start with, and it's just not an acceptable level. So she came to the studio purely because she needed somewhere that would have a much lower noise floor than at her house. And that's why some people come. But I wouldn't say that's a reason for you not to do it at home. I'd say if you're an artist, make your own show reel. Just get it done. Put examples together of all the different voices that you do. So if you want to get into the world of radio drama, make sure you've got comedy, make sure you've got romance, make sure you've got as a horror, all the different genres. So your voice, you can show the whole sort of catalogue of different voices you can do. But if you are not wanting to do that and you're just doing commercials, have a listen to some. Go and look up, just Google a voice agency. There are lots of them out there.
Yes, there are.
And have a listen to some of the different people's show reels and then think, I've got an idea. Do I need a 90-second one and a 30-second? Do I need a 90-second and a 120-second show reel? Do I need a 3-minute show reel? What kind of ones are best to do? We often do 2 lengths for people here. And we also give a guarantee that because we're so proud of what we do, they'll probably win work very quickly after having a good show reel, that we will add in the work that they win into their show reel for no additional cost, because that's how much we believe that the sound that we get is brilliant. And we'll often do it with different microphones so that it feels like a show reel that has a different context to it.
On that, John, when I was in my 20s, I had an epiphany moment. I thought, I'm going to be a voice actor. And that's all I wanted to do. And I just jumped straight into it in the wrong direction and recorded about a 6-7 minute monologue, which took a lot of effort, a lot of takes trying to get it right. And then afterwards I did your wonderful advice and I actually checked to see what other people did within the industry, and everything was just 20-second little clips of them singing or doing different impressions or whatever it might be. And I just thought I wasted all of my time getting that perfect when actually that wasn't the right solution. So it's good advice.
And I think you need to make sure that you use the skills that you have. And if you've only got a very limited range as a voice artist, you only show that. Don't try and do things that you can't do, because the second people hear
things... You saw my vocal reel, didn't you?
As soon as people see things that are inauthentic, then they will consider another actor that's got a smaller range more reliable, and that's what people are looking for, especially with audiobooks. They need consistency. So, and remembering with the audiobooks, probably in a day you'll be doing 4 hours of continuous reading. So those kind of skills need practicing as well. So making sure that you can actually and do have the stamina to get through a day's recording. I would say at the stage of entering the career, it's as an artist, sort of finally, is making sure that you are aware of all the jobs out there. So things like radio drama. There are radio drama awards, which are really worth doing. There's a festival as well. There's at the South Bank at King's Place, there's a brilliant podcast festival, the London Podcast Festival, which is great. And then there is the podcast show as well, which is, as an artist, absorbing yourself in the world that is the one that you want to go into. So finding all the open doors to that. So the podcast festivals in London, the spoken word festivals, going to poetry events, making sure that you're absorbing yourself and meeting those kind of people to know what's out there and know the skills and the characteristics and meet the people, chat to them afterwards, find out what they do. Every single line of work that there is will have a whole sort of community around it. And it's important to be in that before you start thinking you can just plant yourself in it when you want some paid work. You've got to be living it, breathing it, and making sure that is something that you authentically want to be a part of.
Yeah, and without sounding old-fashioned and things ain't how they used to be, but there is really something to be said for going to events and meeting people in real life, because the online world is wonderful and fantastic and opens up many new doors, but there's something to be said about actually meeting people.
Absolutely.
And shaking hands.
I'm only just back from spending a weekend on a networking event for people in music and education, and the difference between that, I mean, I've got the book here with, I don't know how many contacts I made, friends that I would never have met otherwise from just being in the same room as them. I'm sure I've met them or come across them or we've got mutual friends and that online, but being in room with someone for the whole weekend meant that we got into so many different conversation threads and, oh, wow, you do that. God, that's a great idea. And the ideas that I've brought back for here at the studio as a result of meeting people from across the industry, so valid. So definitely make sure you're meeting people. Should we move on to the other side?
I think we should move on to the other side. On the other side of the microphone and the cable, talking about the jobs market there, and when it comes to all things spoken word, opportunities maybe for younger people who might be listening.
There are a lot of jobs in spoken word on the technical side, and training in music technology or audio technology, sound engineers, things like that are all really useful. Unless you're listening to radio dramas, audiobooks, or listening with a critical ear to commercials and wondering why they sound like they do. They're not actually louder, but they sound like they're louder than everything else you're listening to. And working out why that is, compression, then you need to make sure that you are not just thinking that you know it because you've heard an advert before, but you're critically absolutely absorbed in that world as a technician, so that you have the skills then to know when a problem comes up, how to deal with it. And some of those problems are to do with human interaction. So we had an artist a few years ago who's an A-list actor who had dyslexia. They came in with their iPad and they had all of the script all marked up, and they had a blue background and everything was set up for them. They'd put marks all over the script. And just as the session started and we had a virtual link up to Manchester sent through, they just said, oh, John, by the way, I was engineering, could you print this off? It's a new script for the voice actor. I had already seen how much time and effort they'd put into that. And I had to somehow work more with them on a human level to iron out the problems that they were just about to face. And that skill isn't one that was anything taught on a music technology course. That's purely a human interaction. How do you deal with things that come up that you could never have predicted in a studio context? How do you keep people relaxed? How do you subtly give someone a break? So we were recording a voice for TikTok the other day. So we were recording a voice for TikTok, which was retraining a UK female voice for their text to voice. And that voice actor had to speak for hours and hours over months to retrain based on scripts sent from China in English, based on English blogs, different bits of random content. In there, I had to be the person that was between the Chinese and American team on the screen, the virtual link up, and the artist, and make sure that I was looking after her welfare as well, because you can't just keep working all day consistently or put up with people getting cross with you because you're not performing at your best after 6 hours of work. It's your job as an engineer to also be slightly on top of caring for the people that are around you. And those things you can only learn from, having experience in the studio, but going to things like, as a technician, going to the podcast shows and finding out what it's like at those shows. What are voice actors like? What do they demand? What does a voice actor's rider look like? And understanding that side of the industry too. Mm-hmm.
Finding real people, real stories. It sounds a bit cheesy and cliche, but they are for a reason. It's true. Great. Okay, well, at the end of each episode, we're talking about a little bit of tips and tricks. And today's little tip or trick, which is something that I know that I've struggled with sometimes before in the past, is when it comes to the world of, we're going to take podcasting as an example. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice on if you have a guest who maybe knows absolutely nothing about the world of sound technology or recording? Imagine you're recording a podcast and you're getting in maybe a professional footballer who's never sat in front of a microphone, or somebody, just detached from this way. What's the best way of dealing with that?
Nerves are going to be the number one problem.
Yeah.
And nerves bring on a dry mouth and also saying or panicking and sort of seizing up. So the best thing you can do is have the microphones on from as soon as you possibly can and just start. So we were training somebody in podcasting, was it last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And instead of saying we're going to have a tutorial, we just filmed an episode and we just went for it. It's okay. And actually, when you watch it back, you see it getting better over the course of it. If you had to get that done in the day, you'd then just do another take and say, right, should we do it now? And it'd be great. So definitely get some water. Always have water ready for the artists so that they are ready. And then just a few basic things like having how close you are to the microphone and making sure that that remains consistent.
And is there any sort of standards that you'd have for how close to the microphone you should be?
It depends on the message that you're trying to convey. So if you are dominant and you want to be pressing into somebody and you've got that kind of slightly... So, I don't want to use the word arrogant, but you want to portray confidence, you're going to be closer and you're going to always have a sort of intimacy in that sense and be quite... sterile is a horrible word, but it's just shouting straight at somebody, very direct. You just have to remain close the whole time. If you're doing something that is incredibly intimate, you're probably the same distance, but remain quiet the whole time. So that while you're talking, you've got a consistent message. And it is the most intimate because most people listen to these on headphones. So as a podcast, you are going to within, sort of a centimetre of someone's eardrum, and it's incredibly intimate. So by doing the same thing on this side, it creates the same feel. Whereas going back, you hear the sound. And you'd have to, if you were here consistently, you'd have to turn the gain up on that channel to make sure that the average level was consistent. And sometimes you want that if you're having just a chat and an informal sort of conversation. You want it to feel more, hey, yeah, this is what's going on. Oh, isn't it fun? And leaning back and all of that. And it makes it quite three-dimensional. And that's really nice if you're on a conversational podcast because you kind of get, I don't know. It's just nicer. It's more laid back and people feel more like you're in the house with them. So it depends on the purpose of what you're doing. With audiobook recording, I would say the stand is more important than the microphone. So to have a stand that does not droop is incredibly expensive. And you'd think it would be in that a stand has one job, to stand. You'd think that would be a given that they wouldn't change. But even these make noise when you hit them, which is not pleasant. You need one that is not going to move. So our stand in there that we use for voiceover, we've got two of them. There's absolutely no way they can move. They physically can't move. Because with a drooping stand, you often don't even see it happening. So, for example, if you're recording an audiobook over 4 hours, and while you're recording, it's gradually drooping. And so it's changed an inch from the beginning of the day to the end. And then you get to the end of chapter 3, and by then you've had a call back from the producer to confirm that the pronunciation of the word in chapter 1 was wrong, because you always get interruptions. So you think you're doing an audiobook and you think it's just plain sailing. You'll hit a name of a character that you don't know how to pronounce because you can't have rehearsed the entire book beforehand. So you may have done, you may be very diligent and have done that, but most voice actors won't. And in fact, when we do award ceremonies, we have to record hundreds of companies. We do the National Hairdressing Awards every year, and some of them are like curl up and die, and they're obvious. But there are some that are somebody's name, and you don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah. So we have a phone there the whole time. And this sounds a bit cheeky, but I mean they're going for an award, so they get success in the end anyway. We just ring them up and wait to hear how they answer the phone, and that is a guaranteed way of how it's pronounced. And if they complain on the day, then the issue's with their staff, not with us. So we make sure that we do that. But the thing of all of those phone calls and things that happen is that you might go back to a bit of the script that was earlier in the day, and if the mic's been drooping like that, I'm just going to move an inch now from here to here. That's only a 2 centimetre difference from there to there, but the voice will sound so different. And when you try and drop it in, it's going to sound different. So making sure that you've got a good quality stand is absolutely essential. And things like the angle of your microphone to your voice, if you've got the actual capsule, which is like a 2p piece. If you make sure that you are speaking slightly at an angle to it rather than it being straight at it, then if you set a P, an plosive or anything where there's a lot of air that comes out in one go, as it hits the capsule, it will be able to hit it and bounce off. And it will therefore be quieter than one that's getting fully absorbed and having to bounce back. So it's always worth making sure that the angle is right as well. And sometimes if you're getting a lot of P's and B's and you're thinking, oh, goodness me, I've got a pop shield, I've got the right distance, but I'm still getting them, adjusting the mic just by a couple of degrees and then get them to say the same word again, you'll probably find you've solved the issue. So those technical things, I would say, are really helpful with a voice artist who's not got that much experience of doing voice work.
So just making sure that you're aware, if you're in control of that situation, to simplify these things and just sort of mention them to somebody who maybe isn't quite as experienced. I think what you said as well at the beginning about being in the environment immediately is just so important, because I mean, I'm only drawing from my own experience that I've spent most of my life as a performer and not as a recorder. Not as in a recorder, but being a recorded artist. So live sound is where I'm most comfortable, standing in front of hundreds of people, singing, talking. And I always find if I ever go to record vocals for singing, I just immediately seize up, because it's that environment, that environment that you're in, which is a professional sounding environment or in a studio. Your mindset changes completely if it's not what you're used to. So to have somebody come in, if you are recording a podcast with someone who doesn't really know much about this world, immediately sitting down, putting headphones on and a microphone, even if you're not recording, to then break the ice and have a chat and make someone feel comfortable with the full setup if you've got cameras. It just means so much more than doing it in a nice little office or a little sofa room or a green room and then coming into the scary room with all the cables and mics. Good shout. Now, we're fast approaching the end of episode 1, John. And every single episode we're going to finish with recommendations. Ooh. And this is recommendations from both of us with anything to do with the world of sound, of music, events, anything upcoming or anything that we might have gone to or listened to recently that we would like to share personally. So I'm up first. I have listened to, and it's not even been released yet, some of the tracks from Miss Jackie's upcoming EP. Miss Jackie, to round this off beautifully, is a spoken word artist, a musician, singer. She sings so beautifully. But a lot of her verse sections of her songs are done through spoken word poetry. Phenomenal. It sounds so great, and it's being released in May, I believe. I'm hoping I'm correct there. If Miss Jackie's listening,
her first song's already out.
Her first song's already out. Phenomenal. But it just sounds so good. And it's, 10 up to 10 in the kitchen while you're cooking. And I love it. So that's my recommendation. And John?
Yeah, I've just come back from a weekend away with the co-founder of an organisation called Complete Music Update, CMU. And I would thoroughly recommend anybody get on the CMU website, and there's a free subscription to start with. And if you subscribe to the CMU, you get daily updates of the music industry and the sound industry. And I would recommend that so much, just to find out actual facts, hard facts on the ground that are filtered through people who know what they're talking about. Not just biased, it's incredibly unbiased, and so it's a really good source. So I would say get on the CMU website today.
Lovely. Well, I have another recommendation. Maybe you could tell us about this, and this one definitely is a bit biased actually, because I'd like to just very quickly mention about Metronome, because Metronome is an amazing coffee shop, coffee speciality house, and event space, and now a beautiful wine bar. As of very, very recently. And if you don't know anything about our studio, Metronome is connected to us, and we're all one big happy family here. But do you want to just very quickly tell us about what you can expect if you're in the South London area, or just the London area, and you fancy something amazing?
Absolutely. We make sure that the studio stays very professional, and we just work on recording and making sure that that is our primary aim. Through the doors that are just behind us here, we've got a coffee space during the day, and then a wine and entertainment space in the evening. So that's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. We have different events on. They are all on a separate website intentionally, so that the crownlanestudio.co.uk is everything to do with music and sound and recording. And then metronome.life, L-I-F-E, is where you can find any details of events that are coming up. So, for example, we've got a workshop on this very topic of spoken word coming up.
Absolutely.
Have you got the date?
I do have the date. And just to reiterate this, so every podcast that we are publishing comes with 2 extra little bits and pieces.
Ooh.
One of them is an article written by John, sort of summarising what we've been talking about. So there will be an article on spoken word that will be released in conjunction with this episode. And there's a workshop as well. So the workshop is a practical workshop, and you can turn up after you've booked a ticket. It's on the 23rd of May, and it'll be a workshop in the studio. The tickets are £9. So it's a nice, cheap and easy date that you can organise. And you come down and we'll be talking all things spoken word, asking some more specific questions, and actually getting some microphones out and having some fun with it. It's only 1 hour long, so if you would like to do that, there will be a link attached. Otherwise, the only other thing for me is that we really do want to hear from people as well. So if you have any questions about the world of studio, sound, recording, whatever it might be, there's no stupid questions, we like to say. Send your questions in to info@crownlanestudio.co.uk. Otherwise, that's it from me.
Well, thank you for letting me kick off.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having such a wonderful studio, John. Thank you for sharing everything with us. Next episode, for next month, we will be talking all things AI. Scary. Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, whether it's an unknown thing, we shall talk about it then. But otherwise, thank you very much for tuning in to Crown Lane on the Record.